Well, welcome everyone to this exciting event. My name is Julie Roberts and I'm from RMIT. I'm the manager of our social enterprise group. This event tonight, Next Gen Capitalism, Profits, Planet and People, has come out of a partnership between ourselves, social traders and Bank MECU. The Managing Director of Social Traders, David Brooks, will close proceedings tonight, but to begin proceedings, I'd like to welcome Damien Walsh, the Managing Director of Bank MECU, to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Damien.
I acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. As Australia's first customer-owned bank, we are delighted to support tonight's forum, together with our partners in this event, social traders and RMIT's Social Entrepreneurship Group. We're here tonight because Bank MECU believes that generating profit while caring for people and the planet, while an old idea, is the way of the future. In the ongoing wake of the global financial crisis, we sense a renewed interest in both cooperation as a business model and a more responsible approach to capitalism. Bank MECU has successfully been in business as a profitable and values-driven cooperative for more than 50 years. We believe there has never been a more important time for companies like ours to demonstrate leadership and encourage public discussion. In this, the International Year of the Cooperatives, Bank MECU is working to define and develop a 21st century approach to banking, one which uses finance to create shared value and deliver sustainable development for people, communities and the planet. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to our discussion this evening, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Short. Michael rejoined The Age as Executive Editor Business in March 2005, having worked at the newspaper in various roles in the 1980s and the early 1990s, and at one point was in charge of the Melbourne operations of the Australian Financial Review. During his 25-year career, he has worked in print, radio and television in Australia, US and Europe, including a scholarship with the Paris-based Journalists in Europe Foundation. Michael is editor of The Zone, which he created in April 2010, and is published in The Age and across Fairfax Media's digital platforms. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Damien. Good evening, everybody. It's incredible to see so many people out here. It's a beautiful day, but we didn't know that was going to be so. And I think it was Edna O'Brien who wrote a book called August is a Wicked Month, and that's true of Melbourne. So that suggests that people are very interested and even compelled by what we're going to be talking about tonight. Next Gen Capitalism, Profit, People and Planet. Is it back to the future? It's the United Nations Year of the Cooperative, which is the first time the United Nations has ever bestowed that honour on a business model. So there's obviously something going on. Now, it's your night. There are going to be a couple of roving microphones. You can also tweet questions. I'll be monitoring that on my phone and I'll read some of them out. The hashtag is COOPS or COOPS 2012, COOPS 2012 if you want to send questions that way. The night works best if it's done with spontaneity and some robust questioning. Don't hold back. You've got an extraordinary panel. Melina Morrison is the UN Secretariat Director here and a founding Director of Social Business Australia. There are 20,000 or so social businesses in Australia. Danny Almagor is the Chief Executive of Small Giants, which creates and nurtures businesses shifting to social equity and environmental sustainability. McKenzie-McHarg has an incredible story to tell about the Yakandanda Community Development Company and what a beautifully named place is Yakandanda. He's also looking after the Mount Buffalo Community Enterprise, so he's an expert on rural and regional community buyouts. Jonathan Tasini has 30 years experience as a prominent economic and political strategist in the US. He's now living in Sydney, so you've really got an extraordinarily broad and deep panel. I would urge you to make the most of them while you're here. You can also buttonhole them afterwards over a glass of wine. So really get as much as you can out of it. I suspect that a lot of what's going on here is to do with enlightened self-interest, and I mean that at a number of levels. In the work that I've been doing in the zone, I find an extraordinary spirit coming through a lot of community organisations at a time when there's some perhaps justifiable lament, particularly, for example, on the issue of asylum seekers, about a lack of political leadership in Australia. But what I'm finding is an extraordinary amount of community innovation and community leadership. There are 600,000 not-for-profit organisations in Australia. They employ 1 in 12 of us. They create 5% of our GDP. Now, social enterprises include not-for-profits, but tonight we're here to talk about profit-making enterprises, and so there is some enlightened self-interest there too, but it's also at the level of recruitment and retention. What I'm finding with people who are involved in more than just trying to make a maximum profit in a short term is the amount of pleasure and meaning and well-being that people get out of being involved in enterprises of this nature. And there's a lot of them in Australia. There are 1,800 or so, about 108 banking co-ops or mutuals. They have about $83 billion of assets. They service 4.6 million Australians. 7.5 million Australians are member shareholders of cooperatives. This is a very big movement, and it's obviously appealing to people at a lot of levels. Another part of the enlightened self-interest, I think, going on is the idea that there are no healthy back streets without profitable high streets, and no profitable high streets without healthy back streets. We're not here, I don't think, although it'll be interesting to see what happens with the questions and the answers, but I don't think we're here to attack capitalism per se. Social enterprises are about applying business ideas and business expertise to not only making a profit, but solving some social and environmental issues. The greatest form of social justice, I think, is having a job. And these are enterprises that are giving a lot of people a lot of opportunity and employment. So we're talking about the long term, we're talking about well-being, and it's interesting at the moment in Australia that there's a movement, and it's bringing us up to speed with the rest, well, a lot of other countries in the world, to try and measure well-being in the community through other than GDP. GDP, gross domestic product, measures what we produce in the economy, but it leaves out a lot of things that matter a lot to people. And there's a thing called ANDI being developed in Australia at the moment, the Australian National Development Index. And I think that that relates to what we're talking about tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel now, and we're going to start with Melina Morrison. Thanks very much.
I hope this is close enough. It seems like a very big microphone in front of my face. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for bringing up self-interest, enlightened self-interest, because one of the things that so attracted me to cooperatives as a business model when I first became aware of them about a decade ago, when I was writing stories on co-ops from around the world for the International Cooperative Alliance, was this neat trick that they have of bringing self-interest into a group self-interest environment, rolling together the customer, the owner, the shareholder, the member into the one person, so that you don't have the tension between different stakeholders in a profit-driven company. That means that you're actually requiring stakeholders to compete with each other at the same feeding trough for benefits of the capital that's derived from that business. So I very much see co-ops as consortiums of entrepreneurs, if you like. They truly are a community-based model of business. Michael's already introduced me and said what I'm doing this year as a director of the International Cooperative Year of Cooperatives, which is a very privileged position to be in, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bring this fantastic, democratic, ethical, proven and sustainable model of business to greater public awareness. Most importantly, I think, who I am is that I'm a cooperator. And I say that unashamedly because I really do believe that cooperatives and other forms of social business are the best way to democratise capital, to socialise capital, to move economic power from the few to the many. And I believe that co-ops are a very profound business model at scale operating in the globe. 1 billion cooperators, 3 times as many as there are investor shareholders around the globe. 1.5 million cooperative businesses, 100 million employees, 20% more than multinational companies. So we're talking about a very, very large business sector here. And I truly believe that co-ops are the best way to combine market force and social impact or a social objective. And I'm really quite moved, I must say, by the number of people who've come out tonight to talk about a next generation of capitalism. I suppose that's my other sort of defining thought in relation to co-ops, and that is that we come to a place in our evolution, our economic evolution, where the model that's been tested for a while, that short-term profit maximising model, has profoundly failed. It's failed economically, socially, environmentally, and even in Australia it's often said that we got away, we were inured of the shocks of the GFC, we got off quite lightly, and we are an affluent nation, there's no doubt about it. But I don't know if you feel the same way, but I certainly feel that something is broken, and perhaps it's what you were talking about, the back streets. I feel like even in this affluence, we still have a sense of a widening disparity between rich and poor, of inequality, of market concentration that's causing a homogenised high street, if you like, and perhaps a profound sense that we need self-help models to get on with the job of addressing some of the big global issues that are coming to us, particularly through climate change and other macro issues like that. So I guess that's me.
Thanks, Melina Mar.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, as Michael pointed out, I hail from Yackandandah, which is, for the uninitiated, is about a 3.5-hour drive northeast of here in the beautiful, in the foothills of the beautiful Victorian Alps. I work as a business consultant, which brings me to Melbourne at least weekly, working in areas like strategic planning and feasibility studies and business cases, often in the community sector and in areas where success is often defined in terms other than future flows of cash. I moved to Yackandandah in the year 2000, and people have called me a tree changer. I suppose if the cap fits, I need to wear it. Soon after arriving there, I found that in small rural communities, there's really nowhere to hide if stuff happens. And I found myself involved in the formation of the Yackandandah Community Development Company, as Michael referred to, which is basically a little country petrol station that runs the local hardware shop and the local community newspaper and a few things like that. My role there was as a foundation shareholder and founding chairman. I've since been involved in another little project, which was a project to set up as the Mount Buffalo, to put together a business proposal to take over the heritage-listed Mount Buffalo Chalet under a community ownership model as a community enterprise. Unfortunately, we hit a brick wall some time back when we had a change of government, and when a couple of springs ago, every second bridge in Victoria got washed away, which changed capital funding priorities somewhat. Michael asked that we sort of, in this introduction, to talk about what we care about. And I might expand that a little bit about what I care about, what I worry about, and what I'd like to see. I care passionately about the future of rural and regional Australia, and I think it's part of our very national identity, so I care strongly about that. I also care about what is referred to as a social enterprise sector. That's a term I hadn't heard when I first got involved in this field. We called it community enterprise, just doing stuff because it needed to be done. But I care about a robust social enterprise sector, and in my mind that's one that is not going to become reliant on public capital as its engine room. I think a future robust social enterprise sector needs to have mechanisms and frameworks and structures, both within the law, importantly within the law and within the Corporations Act, which enable it to embrace private capital as the means of getting stuff done. And that means it needs to embrace the notion of profit rather than shun it. So I look forward to an interesting discussion, and I'll hand over to Danny.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I guess I'll tell you the brief story about how I got here, and then hopefully we'll get lots of questions. But my journey was, I guess our journey started a very long time ago, but I'll start just after university. I started something called Engineers Without Borders, which is a non-profit, like the Without Borders brand that you might have heard of, sends engineers around the world to do aid work. So it's very much in the non-profit world. And at the same time, I wasn't making any money, so I had to start a company to try and help fund myself. My parents helped out a bit and other stuff, but in the end, I started a company called Medivac, which was a corporate health provider. And I ran both of those for quite a number of years and built them up separately, which was kind of weird because, you know, my office, which was out of my old bedroom, had two phones in it. So one of them would ring and you'd answer, and I'd kind of be a bit nervous that I'd answer the wrong phone with the wrong message, which happened a few times, but it was kind of good. Sometimes I got a contract when someone was ringing for Engineers Without Borders to vaccinate their staff. So that was cool. But I guess through that journey, I really felt that there were sort of two sides, and you know, I guess this is something that maybe a lot of people in the social enterprise space, or however you define yourselves, feel, which is one hat you wear is commercial, and you know, this is a business and it's about making profit, and very much for me, although you know, healthcare I think is an amazing benefit to society, the business that I was running you know, wasn't intentional in that way. Obviously I wanted to do something that was good, but it wasn't about, you know, we didn't have a mission to try and, you know, create the healthiest Australia possible. It was a way to make some money so that I could continue to follow my passion, which was Engineers Without Borders. And I guess finally it sort of came to me that I was wearing one hat which was commercial and profit-driven, one hat which was mission-driven and obviously non-profit, and felt that there was a sense of imbalance. And along with my wife, who you know has an amazing story of her own, we sort of said we need to find something that's in between. Can you mix this idea of profit and purpose? I also much prefer running a for-profit than a non-profit. For those who've been involved in a non-profit, I think it's much harder than a for-profit because you've got all these extra bits that you have to consider. Whereas a for-profit, ultimately you've got a product or a service, and you know somebody's interested in it or they're not. The feedback is direct. So I find that a little bit easier. So it was kind of this nice space in between. And we read a book called Small Giants, which I absolutely loved. I didn't know about the term social enterprise, and still sort of, although I've embraced it and I actually sit part-time at RMIT as a social entrepreneur in residence, I never sort of think of it as social enterprise. It's too hard to sort of define. For me, it's about just a different, I guess, the concept of today, the paradigm around doing business. And Small Giants was a book that spoke a lot about that paradigm. Businesses that choose to be great instead of big. And that was a bit of that moment when my wife and I sort of looked at each other and said, wow, that's, you know, we've got to go down that path, and slowly exited out of Medivac, ended up selling that, and exited out of Engineers Without Borders and got involved in Small Giants. And what Small Giants was really a facilitation vehicle for businesses we thought were bringing those two things together, bringing profit and purpose, and sort of, I guess, in the simplest way, making the difference in the world that we wanted to see. And that's very much what Small Giants does now. we invest in or partner with, nurture businesses that, that I guess, we share a passion with the idea and have a wonderful relationship with the management. Or indeed, sometimes we see a gap and we start our own. So it's kind of a very eclectic, diverse group of businesses, from organic female products, tampons and pads. Tom, if you want to check it out, it's awesome. And Real Men Buy Tampons, so even the guys in here, you guys can do it as well. And not use them, just buy them and share them. To magazines, and we've had investments in hospitality, in restaurants, and even in sustainable property development. So it's incredibly diverse. And what brings us together, I guess, as a business is, instead of being vertically integrated, sort of saying, we focus on products, within one category, we kind of said we want to focus on the person. That person is me and the staff at Small Giants. What are we passionate about? What do we want to fill our lives with? And then we try and find companies that we love, that we want to have within our lives. Where do we buy our products or our clothes and this and that? And occasionally we find someone who needs a bit of help, who fits that bill, and we try and get involved and help them out. So that gives you a bit of a sense of Small Giants and my background. I guess the point for me of being here tonight is, a part of the conversation is, I think it really is, as I said, sort of the Small Giants idea was that paradigm shift between those two different hats that people wear. I think we need to shift society. I've got this sense, and I'm an engineer, so I apologise for people who don't get graphs, but I'm going to do a graph, right? So imagine you've got a horizontal and a vertical axis, right? And on one side you've got profit, and on the other side you've got people and the planet. So imagine that as a dichotomy. I don't think it needs to be a dichotomy, and I think the idea of a triple bottom line or holistic business is the way we should be thinking about it. But I think in our world today, largely in the business sector, we do have that dichotomy of it's either about profit or it's about people in the environment, and obviously that sits at the non-profit end. And I just think we've been skewed. The whole point of us being on this planet is to find balance. And that balance changes and moves around, and this is getting very zen, but there's a balance, and I sort of feel we're just incredibly out of balance at the moment. And one of the things Small Giants would like to do is sort of grab that curve. So imagine, obviously on that axis, we've got too many people on that side, at least when they're in their waking hours, before they get home and hang out with their kids or their partners. And our job is quite simply, and I think we're all here because we sort of feel like we need to grab that mass and just shift it across a bit. And we're hoping that Small Giants is an example of how that can be done, that's still commercial. It's a way to be able to live your life within the value system.
Thank you, Danny. Jonathan.
Well, good evening, everyone. I was almost inclined to go down Danny's path of Real Men Buy Tampons, but that would perhaps create quite a debate and engage the audience. I'm not from here, but and this is actually my first time in Melbourne, a wonderful city, and this is an incredible facility. So whoever designed it and built it, it's really extraordinary. A couple of notes about myself. First of all, I want to thank my colleague Fiona Nixon, who works with me at Central Media Communications. That's how I ended up here. I was brought to EMC sort of from a little island called Manhattan to help build a new media platform on the internet, which will be about progressive politics and debate, which is really, this wonderful topic fits right into that. And actually, it's great for you to tweet. If those of you who want to actually write more than 140 characters, we've opened up a little space on our blog right now at essentialvision.com.au/opinion, and you can actually post there and comment, and we can collect the comments and pass them on to all our panelists and the community so the conversation can continue beyond here. So I think since I'm not from Australia, maybe I'll make several points that I think touch on what's happening here and also in other parts of the globe, particularly the US, which is where most of my experience has been. The first thing is that in the past year, we've seen the whole Occupy Wall Street movement erupt, certainly in the United States and spread all around the world. And a lot of that happened in New York. I took part in a lot of the demonstrations there and listened to folks. And really, there was one simple message, is that something is not working. We're pissed off. Something has to be fixed. And this economy, this world is not working for us. Meaning the 99%, as Melina's button states, that famous slogan. And in Michael's introduction, he said, we're not here to attack capitalism. And I think that's right, because the problem is not capitalism. The problem is corrupt, so-called free market cronyism capitalism, which is very, very different. Because that system, corrupt, free market, so-called free market, which I would argue actually doesn't exist, it's just a marketing phrase, cronyism has led us to the greatest robbery in human history, the greatest transfer of wealth from the people to a few. In the US, for example, the United States now, the richest nation that has ever been on this planet in human history, has the highest level of poverty since they started taking statistics on that. In the richest nation in human history. That is corrupt free market capitalism at its purest form. And so what we're here today to talk about is, how do we create an economic system with rules that benefit the majority of people? Now, there are probably people here in the audience from the business community who work in this. If you took your hats off for a second and thought for a moment, is this system working in the world? I'm just, as a human being, not as the CEO of a company or manager, do you think this system is working in the world in terms of guaranteeing prosperity? And the honest answer has to be no. The second point is, and this I feel, when people ask me who I am, the thing I really mostly say is I'm a member of a union, and I'm proud of that. The labor movement, meaning small L unions, is the greatest force for economic justice and economic prosperity in human history. And in the US, when we have talked often about social capitalism, doing socially viable companies, too often we forget in that equation having unions and strengthening unions. There will never be economic prosperity for the whole unless the labor movement is strong again. Now, if you want to debate about issues, problems, and differences in the labor movement, how we can do things better, I'm open to that discussion. But in terms of bringing prosperity to the majority of people, unions are an essential part of that. And you can actually go back to your graph. If you look at the United States, and I'm going to be generally using my hand movements like this as a New Yorker, you can look at a line going straight up where productivity has increased over the last 30 years, which means people have been working their asses off really hard. And at that exact line is the mirror opposite to the decline in unions. So what has happened is that people have been working really hard and productivity has been skyrocketing, somewhat because of technology, but mostly because they've been working hard. And at the exact same time, unions have been declining. So what has happened is all that productivity, all that wealth that has been created has not gone to the 99%. The last point I'll make is this, and I don't have an answer for this observation. There is a tension, and Melina referred to it a little bit, about the collapse of the planet. And I find in one of the most troubling things that I find in the United States, and I think it's true in other countries, is that union leaders, political leaders on both sides of the parties are always arguing about growth, growth, growth. We can grow, we can grow, we can grow, we can expand, we can expand. And it's not clear to me that that's a survivable route. That the planet is this close to collapse, and in many ways has already started collapsing. We can't simply continue to grow in the way that we used to think about growth without leaving to future generations a completely destroyed planet. A guy named Herman Daly, who used to work for the World Bank, an economist, observed that really the challenge to us is to think about how we grow the economy qualitatively to make it a better economy for people, that we share resources in a better way, that we're more efficient rather than quantitatively. And I think that's important to remember as we talk about social capitalism. How do we do that in the context of a planet that's under stress? Thank you.
Well, there's a bit of meat there to get stuck into. It's hard for me to see. So is there somebody with the first question? Speaking of cooperation, a big company called Optus is not cooperating all that well with me at the moment, so I'm sort of slipping between 2G and even slower. But I'm trying to get, but do tweet your questions, they're coming in slowly. Is there a first question from the audience? Okay, I've got one down here, and then up the back there we'll go next.
Jonathan, you mentioned something about the rise of the unions, or the re-rise of the unions being a possible solution going forward. And then there's this, would you consider cooperatives as, how would you consider cooperatives and unions? Are they?
It's a good question. My understanding is that the ACTU has actually endorsed the notion of supporting cooperatives, and if there's somebody from the ACTU they should correct me. But I think they've supported the idea of cooperatives. Now, you know, what I want to see, forget whether we say unions or cooperatives, I believe workers need a voice. And I do not think that, if you look at simply history, that any democracy can survive economically if people don't have a collective voice. You simply can't do it as individuals. One of the things I did in the US is I ran a union for freelance writers, which are the most oppressed, well, I shouldn't say the most oppressed. They are in very difficult straits, partly because they end up negotiating alone as individuals against Rupert Murdoch, for example, or through his editors. That's unsustainable in terms of making a living. So I'm all for exploring co-ops and ways that people organize. In the US, there are other ways that people are trying to organize through alliances and community organizations. The bottom line, I'm a union man. I believe in unions, but I would totally support the Taxi Workers Alliance in New York, which is not a union, because they're organizing people collectively to try to get better conditions for people. So I'm less ideological in that way. What I want to make sure is that there's a counterweight to not because business people are bad people, and actually when you work in partnership, unions can actually be very, very helpful. It's that as individual workers, and you know this, everybody's sitting out there, it's very hard to speak up alone. And collective action, whether you're arguing for workers' rights or women's rights, civil rights, is very important to a democratic society.
There's a question up the back. While you're getting the microphone there, we've got one here on the Twitter feed from, I hope I get this pronunciation correct, Phil. This is Phil Schlem. It's a question for Danny. Small Giants, the first Aussie B Corp. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
B Corporation is an idea that came out of the US, a non-profit called B Labs, who were doing a rating system on businesses for impact investors. So if you're an investor and you wanted to invest in a business, and you had the values that we're talking about, you're trying to work out how to make sure that this business is a good business to invest in. And they came up with a rating scheme called the Global Impact Investment Rating Scheme, GEARS. Out of that came this idea that maybe if we're an investment firm and we're looking to invest in a business and we're using this rating scheme, wouldn't it be great if businesses could actually rate themselves and get accredited? So ultimately what happened is B Corporation was created as, a label, a standard, a bit like organic or fair trade. So if you go to the supermarket and buy a fair trade block of chocolate, well, you know that behind that label fair trade, there's a whole lot of rigour, due diligence, auditing of the process to get that chocolate to you, the farmers, etc. So B Corporation is basically a process that a business can go through, a whole lot of questions, about 200 questions, from transparency to governance to diversity in your workplace, environmental sustainability, workers' rights, etc. Even to the extent of profit share or ownership issues. So you fill in all these questions, and ultimately if you get above a certain target or a certain number, you're eligible to be a B Corp. And that number, I believe, I think it's a wonderful process, and we obviously adopted and became Australia's first B Corp about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think their process makes it incredibly hard to bullshit the system, basically. It's very difficult to greenwash and get your way through enough answers to be able to get that accreditation. So what it's really doing, it's really separating those who truly believe to those who want to just give a perception that they're doing better stuff. And with so many people who know about it, really the only benefit of B Corporation is if it becomes a movement. I guess in that sense of unions, I think what you're really saying there, and I don't know if union is really a descriptor of what it is that you're talking about. You're talking about the idea of people coming together to be able to affect change. And unions is one element of it. But I think, like you said, it can be described in any way. And for me, the concept of joining B Corp is we've just joined another 500 other companies. So it's not workers, but companies that have chosen to come together and say, we don't like the system, we want to change that system as well. So it's a union of companies, I don't know. But in a sense, that's really what B Corporation's trying to do.
We had a question up the back here, please.
Yeah, sure.
Thank
Thank you all for your talk tonight, very interesting. I was listening to a lecture the other day, a podcast by Bill Clinton. He was talking about examples of multinationals and major corporations who are doing good things in this space. And an example he pointed to was Procter & Gamble, which apparently have a objective of saving a life every day, and the way they're doing that is through water purification tablets. So I was just wondering if you know of other multinationals, other major corporations who you think are setting good examples, who are perhaps not participating in the cronyism that Jonathan was talking about.
Well, I mean, I can jump in, but I'm interested to hear what other people think. I think, I'm going to go back. If you check out the B Corp page, you'll get a whole lot of companies that really believe this. I mean, some of the big ones on there, if you've heard of Seventh Generation, which is a cleaning product, or they've got quite a broad range of products. Etsy, which is a bit like eBay for handmade goods, an online handmade market. Patagonia, which make the outdoor clothes. So there are some big companies there. What's weird is, I mean, I've, through my various roles in various companies, I've met with a lot of very large corporations, and I actually think that there aren't many really evil people out there. There are some that I think are really quite bad, but by and large, I think people want to do well, want to do good, and I guess I'm finding that a lot of the large corporations have got people in there who really want to make a difference, and I think our role is almost to try and facilitate an environment, create a fertile ground for those things to be able to bubble up to the surface. So there are so many that I've met with, big companies that I think are doing some great stuff.
Mark, you wanted to jump in there?
Thanks, Michael. It's a good question, and it goes to an issue that's on my mind. And Danny's comments about when he was explaining B Corp sort of headed off a question that was in my mind, and he said, it's pretty robust. He went in and said, it's pretty hard to bullshit the system. This gentleman's question was sort of saying, well, it sort of went to the core of the issue. How do we discern from very slick corporate rhetoric from genuine concern for outcomes which go beyond lining your pockets? That's the challenge, because I think we talk about the language of triple bottom line. We see the language of corporate social responsibility coming through really strongly in the corporate world, because guess what? It's good marketing. So how do we discern between the genuine concern as opposed to the slick corporate rhetoric, I think, is a big challenge. I think it's a debate that we've got to take wider than this room. Can I just make a comment about a feeling I've got here? You did a quick show of hands, and I think you probably got about a 50% response on awareness of the B Corp. Could you put your hand up if you're on the board of a top 200 Australian listed company? Thank you. I think what we have here is...
They're too embarrassed.
No. My point, I couldn't see anyone. I was reasonably confident in the outcome of that. I think we've got an issue here. If we're a movement, we've got to think about where those people are, and are we preaching to the converted in this room? But how do we embrace the people a stone's throw from here in Collins Street, who are the movers and shakers, and they control the lion's share of private capital in this country? That's the challenge.
But if I just jump in on that, can you put your hand up if you work for what you think might be one of the 200 largest entities in Australia? Hand up if you work there. So a few hands. The question is, do you need to be at the top or do you need to be in the system? My point there was, I think the people inside the system are ready, right? And I mean, this sellout thing, maybe most of the people at the top aren't, but that's the 99, isn't it? That's our job, to try and change that.
Melina.
Why are we talking about the system as if it's set in stone? I just feel we need to go for something more profound here. Just like nature, you need biodiversity in the business community. We need a transfer of ownership. We need more businesses that are owned by a broader range of stakeholders. I'm very happy that the large corporations are deciding to give more of their profit or surplus to so-called social objectives. I'm happy to hear that the Banking Association is pledging an oath to be more transparent, more ethical and more trustworthy. Why did we have to bring the modern economy to the brink of disaster to achieve these basic ethical and trust and social objectives as an outcome of business? I think we need to remind ourselves why the marketing exercise is going on, why corporations are having a rethink about what the bottom line is. And that's because there is a crisis in branding that they're confronting. People have seen that it doesn't work for the masses to have short-term profiteering. So we need to really get inside the machine and manipulate it and have more diversity in the businesses that are conducting enterprise at all levels.
Melina, before I go to Jonathan, I think you wanted to make a point on this. How would you advise, I mean, we may be preaching to the converted here, I'm not sure, but those who want to get involved in the sort of thing you're talking about, to set up a cooperative or to launch a business, I think part of the answer to this is probably technology. The web has created, has brought down a lot of barriers, for example, in media where there's a lot of disruption going on. But how would you advise people to get cracking?
I want to see us all become disruptive capitalists now, agitators in the market. You can occupy the market and you can do it right now through your consumer choices. Become aware that there are different forms of business and that you have a discretionary dollar. You can spend your dollar and invest it in a business that is investing directly in the community. Not all the time. I mean, we live in a biodiverse environment where we're spreading our consumer dollar around, but co-ops, mutuals, employee-owned enterprises, not-for-profits that are companies limited by guarantee, the trading arms of charities, other forms of social enterprise, B Corps, community-owned businesses. These are businesses that are structurally different. They distribute the wealth. They do two things. They share prosperity and they believe in social value as a core of the DNA of the business, not an add-on, but as actually the reason for conducting business. So we can all engage in that disruption in the marketplace by choosing to consume or to trade with co-ops, customer-owned banks, credit unions, other forms of social enterprise, and we can choose them as the preferred model of business when we are trying to address a need, a market need. All of these businesses trade in the market for a social outcome. They all wash their face in commercial waters, profit is really important. It's what happens with the profit, and that's the difference, I think, I think we should also keep a certain level of cynicism, healthy cynicism, as we see the modern corporation come on board the bandwagon, which is to pay more attention to a triple line. Is it really deeply embedded in the business? Have they really overcome the tension between the need to extract the capital for the disinterested shareholders or to truly give back to the community?
It can be very hard to use your consumer sovereignty in a disruptive way in some areas in Australia, though, can't it, with a supermarket duopoly such that we have? I think that's a profound problem. But there's a question down here.
One of my favourite authors is Theodore Zeldin, and he made the observation that in most meetings, pride or caution prevents people from saying what they truly believe. I say this because people in organisations are afraid to speak up, and they're afraid to take action when they see poor decisions being made, when they see decisions made on the basis of either profit or corruption. But has anyone got any ideas about how we might tackle the idea of the bystander phenomenon?
Jonathan.
I hate to sound like a one-note pony here, but that's one of the reasons that unions existed, is to give people that collective voice, because it is very, very hard for people to stand up, certainly in the context of a company. And out in society, it's very hard because, particularly if you're looking for political leaders, and the political leaders seem to be saying the same things and don't seem to be, for example, you've got the empty suit, which is the name I use for the leader of the coalition, who seems to be just repeating this American disease idea that they want to be in government to follow the exact same policies that have failed for 30 years. And so if you're the average individual person who wants to engage in society and you see that kind of dialogue, your attitude, and I don't blame it, and this happens in the US, so they say, forget it, I'll just go on with my life. So it's partly fear, but it's also, I think, a little bit of people are exhausted. You know, if you, again, this is mostly in the US, my experience, if you've got two jobs and you drop your kids off, in daycare and you run to one job and you come to the next job, most Americans, first of all, don't then vote on election day because they're too tired, but they also don't want to engage. And so they kind of retreat. That said, and this would be I'm generally an optimist, so looking at it optimistically, I know it doesn't sound like it, right? Look what happened with Occupy Wall Street. I mean, people did a lot of criticizing of that, but when you walked and actually marched in those rallies, there were a lot of people there who had not been walking and marching in 30 years, I remember walking actually in one march, and there was this pretty well-dressed couple pushing a stroller, and I heard him say to her, oh, boy, I haven't done this since like 1970 something. And so there's both of those. There's the exhaustion, and but then there's the connection of these movements. I have, in the later years of my life, given up on electoral politics, even having actually run for office once. I think it's all about movements. And the only way we actually have change in this society is if we build broad-based movements on people to basically set rules that don't allow what you suggested. The question is not, can I point out the good companies and what they're doing? It's not because they're bad people, it's because we have to set the new rules. We are the ones that have to stand up and basically shake the country, shake the planet, and take control. And that's the only way we'll engage again.
Melina, do you want to comment on that?
I'd just like to give an example right here in Victoria of the way, I totally agree with what you're saying, Jonathan. I think on the flip side of the apathy that you're perhaps pointing to, there's an incredible rise in movements like collaborative consumption, people self-organising around a need, an identified need. It can be formalised into something like a cooperative, or it can be informal, but it's still a community of need addressing a communal issue. And there's a rise in these. Social media's picked up on it fantastically. So the energy and the innovation is there. I feel really positive when I hear about business ventures like Hepburn Wind. Have we got someone here tonight from Hepburn? What an amazing example of community response that is. I know Danny's very familiar with them. Dalesford, community of people sick of waiting around for the political cycle of discussion about carbon pricing, climate change, whether we're going to do anything. Set up a business, a commercially high-end business in green energy production. That wind farm now supplies the town, produces a surplus that's fed back to the grid. It's highly profitable. It is supplying their community need to have access to a green energy source. It wasn't a company coming in and doing it for them. It wasn't an outside investor saying, we'll set up a wind farm here, we'll generate profit for shareholders, and we'll supply the town with green energy. This is a community-owned company. And these are the kind of examples of self-help that can be utilised by communities. You asked before, what can we do? We actually have these legal models available. We can take them and we can decide that we can actually respond to our social needs as groups of people. We have to do it, in fact.
There's a question down here and there's one over here, but before we go there, Mark, your experience in Yakandanda is just an extraordinary story. Can you talk just very quickly about what happened, and perhaps point people who might be interested in that to somewhere online they could find the story? Is there somewhere? Because it's a beautiful story.
Where do you start? I mean, at one level, this was a story that was, a petrol station in a small country town. It's small bickies. We're sitting here in Federation Square. It's sort of pretty boring, really. There's nothing, but there's not much to it in the greater scheme of things. If you're a capital city dweller, I suppose. I can hear some feedback of a mobile phone happening somewhere. But the reality was, for a small township the size of Yakandanda, is that we actually chose, being self-employed, I actually chose to move to the township of Yakandanda. We sort of went through a bit of a shortlisting process. We looked at Echuca and Queenscliff and Rutherglen, and I wanted to raise a family in a country town. And a country town somewhere that's not a sort of an outer suburban place, it had to meet certain criteria, and it had to have a pub. It had to have a public hall. It had to have some shops. So it had to be a town in the traditional sense of the word. And soon after we moved there, the only petrol station was going to shut. And and everyone was running around passing hats around the main street saying, throw $5 in the hat, we'll see what we can do. And it became very clear quickly that $5 in the hat was not going to resolve this. What we really needed was to get $1,000 from every family in the town if we really wanted to. We could see this as just sort of the thin end of the wedge in terms of what was happening in rural townships. So we formed, and it was more than petrol. So we formed a community development company, the constitution of which does not mention the word fuel, energy or petrol. We set it up as an unlisted public company. We issued an offer information statement, which is subsidiary to a prospectus. And we basically said to people in the town, if you believe in the future of your township, buy shares in it. And they did. They did at a rate. Yakandanda's got a population of about 800 or 900 people. The subscription rate of that share offer, if you transposed it to metropolitan Melbourne at the time, I did a quick calculation, if you did the same thing in Melbourne, you would have raised enough money to build CityLink out of metropolitan Melbourne. So that's the sort of relativity it was. Anyway, so it's trading today. This is not a gold mine business. Selling fuel is a mug's game by any measure. But it's pretty important to the township, and that's what it's all about. It employs young kids, it ekes out a meagre living, it makes a small surplus, and it's an important company. So that's the story.
And it made sense too, didn't it? Because there was, again, enlightened self-interest, because you were going to have to drive 40 kilometres to get petrol, so it would have increased the real cost of what you were doing. We've got a question down here. Oh, okay, there was one over here.
I was just wanting to help Jonathan out a little bit, Jonathan, you mentioned before that the ACTU may have endorsed cooperatives. They've actually endorsed a project called the Earthworker Cooperative.
Right.
And to cut a long story short, the idea is to produce solar hot water units in Morwell, where there is a lot of energy intensive industry, move workers across to sustainable jobs that they own as a cooperative, producing solar hot water units, and union members in industries where there's high membership actually bargaining for those solar hot water units as part of their package, so their power bills go down because we've just got this carbon tax that's come in. So the ACTU's taken a pretty big risk, and it's pretty edgy stuff for the union movement to be involved in this kind of thing, because there's lots of people in that movement that might say, oh look, let's just stick to getting the best deal possible in this company. This idea is actually people forming the company themselves, getting involved in social entrepreneurship and building up something that could be as big as Mondragon, which, as we know, as some people might know here, is one of the largest cooperatives in the world in Basque Spain, a huge powerhouse which the employees actually own this huge company. There's a huge credit union as well, and there's a cooperative university. So the vision is Mondragon and Morwell, believe it or not, to have a kind of an ecosystem of mutual business, working with each other, funding new enterprise in the cooperative space.
I think that...
Just quickly, could you tweet me that so that I know, at Jonathan Tasini cleverly, very secretively, that story so that I can know that? You know, there's a restaurant called Colors in New York. If you ever go take a trip to New York, go to a restaurant called Colors, which is owned by the workers who survived the September 11th collapse of the World Trade Towers. They worked in the windows on the world. Some of you may have eaten there one year. When the towers collapsed, they happened not to be at work. And so they came together as workers to own that restaurant and run it themselves. So it's I was a very regular customer there. So I applaud that, what you're doing there and that. But I'd like to have the tweet on that,
Melina.
The information.
Just very quickly, I'm so glad you've brought up about Earthworker, because that's such a fantastic example in the International Year of Co-ops of how the synergy between cooperatives and workers can work so well. That wonderful nascent enterprise will transition those coal workers into green energy jobs, but most importantly, it's the jobs that they own. And when they are the stakeholders, the major stakeholders in that enterprise, then the core value of the company is the value of work, not capital. Capital is the means or the tool, not the end in itself. It's the value of work. And you mentioned Mondragon. Mondragon is Spain's 7th largest corporation. It's a business, a federation of worker-owned cooperatives. 83,000 workers own those companies, another 20,000 or so employed. Spain has 52% youth unemployment, but if you live in the Basque region, in the Mondragon economy, a fantastic ecosystem, you will experience half that rate of unemployment. When the GFC hit, those workers had to come together very quickly. Remember, they are the major stakeholder in the business, enlightened self-interest. They decided to take a wage cut of 7.5% based on the knowledge that this was about long-term sustainability, that they had to keep their jobs viable. These were the businesses they owned. They were making a decision about the viability of the business. And this is where the fantastic connection between co-ops and the labour movement can go so far. And there's a great tradition of connection between trade unions and co-ops. Trade union movements were foundation partners in the great credit union sector of Australia. We're the 3rd largest credit union sector in the world after Canada and the US, and that came out of a great connection between trade unions wanting to socialise the workers' capital, as it did, Michael mentioned, with the industry superannuation sector.
We've got another question up in the middle here.
Hi everyone. Given cooperatives are such a fantastic model, I'm curious to know how we support more of them into existence. Are they driven by ethical, social values business people, or can they also be facilitated by other stakeholders such as local government or other people who are really keen to see more cooperative businesses in existence?
Who wants to take that?
I'll take it. That's such a great question. There are so many people can start cooperatives. Communities of stakeholders start cooperatives. They can be individuals. They can be collections of people trying to resolve a market inequality, like farmer-owned cooperatives. Murray Goulburn, Australia's largest food exporter, grew out of market equality with farmers needing to protect the farm gate price. It's still farmer-owned. The public sector is a great partner in cooperatives, and we do need to engage with local government, state and federal government as to the advantages of cooperatives to deliver social services, for example. That's happening very widely in the UK with the slightly derided now big society movement, but the idea of devolving some of the power, economic and management power, back to the workers, the employees in the social services sector is a very important part of that movement. We do need to bring these collectives together.
Danny, I know you want to say something on that, and please do, but there's also a question here from, I hope I get this pronunciation right, Sarah's Fair Food, which seems apposite at this point. What legal and tax or tax structures do you think need to be put in place to support the social enterprise sector? And the answer to that may be, well, they're already there, because apparently there's a lot going on, obviously. But is there, and others feel free to jump in, then we'll come to this question over here. But do we have the right legal and tax structures?
I can talk to that on a number of levels. I want to come back to that idea of the cooperative as well for a moment within that. Number one, I think that structure doesn't define impact. And one of the challenges, and I'm a member of a number of cooperatives, and we've invested in a number of cooperatives, including Hepburn Wind, and a member of MECU Bank, which I think is an incredible example in Australia. However, the fact of being a cooperative, I don't think, is that doesn't solve the problem. And in fact, that tweet is a really interesting segue into what we're trying to achieve here. And I think what we're trying to achieve is an impact. We're trying to achieve a change. I think that somehow, and I don't know what happened on the journey of commerce, and that's whether it's in capitalism or somewhere else, we got this idea that the individual is more important than society, which seems to be, at least from my perspective, the way our economic system works. So here are the rules, and as long as I don't break the rules, or if I can break them and get away with them, then that's okay. So if I can jump around a little bit, I'm going to give. Does everyone know about the story of the starfish? There was a lot of starfish get washed up on the ocean, onto the beach, and a little kid walks past and throws all the starfish back in, and this little girl feels great, and she's throwing them in. There are thousands on the beach, and she goes up and there's an old man sitting there, and he says, "Little girl, what are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm trying to save the starfish and throwing them in one at a time." And he looks and he says, "But like every wave, another 1,000 starfish get washed up. Like you can't win this." And she says, "Well, I know I can't, but for that starfish I just threw in, he's pretty happy that I've been doing this." And I kind of feel like there's an interesting dilemma here. One of them is within the system, so what laws, what rules, what regulations can we create to try and protect ourselves against this paradigm shift into self-interest? And that is, let's set a law that businesses can't, cheat, and businesses can't, create monopolies, and, ACCC. We've got all these elements. And within that, I think we don't have the right laws to try and protect on the things that we need. The benefits of good companies versus bad companies aren't really expressed in society other than when you break major laws, I think. But the deeper question is, and as an engineer, and I used to think of this in Engineers Up Borders, is actually what if we put a net up in the ocean that actually stops starfish from getting washed up, or we put a beacon that sort of sends this signal, speaks to starfish and say, don't come too close to the shore because the next wave will wash you up. And although we've got some kids throwing back in, we might not get everyone. And so I sort of think like we need, from a strategic perspective, we need to deal with the laws. What legislation do we need now? And in the US, interestingly with B Corporation, there are now tax and legal structures around B corporations in, I think it's about 8 states in the US, and it's growing all the time, New York, LA, Florida and a number of others. So you can do that. But I think what we maybe need to do, and I don't know, again, if we've got it here, is really think about a whole new paradigm. Like, instead of throwing it back in and dealing with each law as it comes, what system do we want? And I mean, one of the things I'm interested in, I've looked at Bhutan, and they've got this gross national happiness concept, which some of you might have heard of. I think we need to reimagine. I mean, Herman Daly talks about it. Maybe growth is not the paradigm in which we want to actually work. So I want to throw that out there.
That index is going the wrong way at the moment, by the way. But Jonathan wants to take you on there. Then we've got a question.
Before this panel started, we were told that we should try to disagree with each other. So, this guy, he's a really nice guy, but I'm going to disagree with you slightly. Laws do matter, and while I like the ingenuity idea, I'll give you one great example. The global financial crisis would not have happened but for the corruption of American politics, which led to the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which allowed these bankers to go wild and essentially obliterate trillions of dollars of wealth and millions of jobs. So I guess I'm the opposite. I mean, I think we have to set the rules of society in place first and, look for that ingenuity and those ideas that help. But unless we reimagine or hold people accountable, it's sort of what the gentleman here asked before, how do people get engaged? Well, if they don't think that the rules are going to work and that there isn't some system, they're not going to want to participate.
Well, is it, just on that, I mean, is it the laws or is it the culture? Because I don't know, I mean, you talk about this one law and I don't know about that, but would that have saved Wall Street? Or is it the culture that we're creating there? It's a much bigger thing that whatever law it is, the culture is more, burn.
Okay, I have an answer. I think there are just greedy people in the world. I know this is a shock. And most of them, not named Gina Reinhardt, are not really bad people or unethical, but you do have to set laws in place that prevent people from doing stuff that, most of us are good people, but if you don't have rules in place, and frankly, if you don't have people going to jail when they break the rules as opposed to just getting fined, I mean, if people start sitting in jail and there really has to be a system that holds people accountable. And I don't believe that the ethical goodness or the wonderfulness of people wins out. I think you have to have the rules.
Mark.
And of course, you're right. We were asked to try and disagree, except I thought I was going to be disagreeing with Jonathan, but I think I'm going to end up agreeing with him. I'm with you on the laws. That group of people I referred to over in Collins Street a little bit earlier, they work under an act called the Corporations Law 2000, which is a national law. So I would argue that the lion's share of Australia's private capital operates under that act. Interestingly, if you read that act, it talks about the objectives. There's nothing in there that says that your objective has to be a very narrow focus on maximising private wealth. It doesn't actually say that anywhere in the Corporations Act. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but that's a layman's reading of it. Interestingly, I think the way the system is interpreted through ASIC and in this country, I think it's interpreted that the way business works is that if you're in business, that must be your goal. So I don't think the way corporations work actually embrace all these non-financial goals and outcomes that we're talking about very well. So I think the law does have to change to embrace a broader notion of, I don't know how, I haven't got an idea, but I think it does have to change.
But I mean, if I can...
Melina, want to come in?
I get to disagree with you all. Excellent. Not exactly, no, but I think it is about structure. Structure is the thing that can guarantee that you get a determined social value from something. I really don't think this is about... It doesn't matter what the law says if the structure actually prevents the distribution of the profits, which is really what you're talking about right now, to the broadest stakeholder model possible. And I'm yet to find, please enlighten me, a model, I'm biased, that is more able to deliver structurally the benefits of commercial enterprise or activity to the broadest number of people. And I think it does have to be about structure.
We've got a question. Thank you for your patience in the middle there. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you all for your contributions. My limited observation of the social enterprise space in Australia is that with the exception of a few organisations such as Bank MECU, it's a space characterised by local, smaller organisations, and I guess my sense is to really have the impact we need to, the whole social business space needs to be much more scalable and large-scale businesses. And I'm just interested to hear from any of the panel around what you think that will take. What are some of the barriers to that currently, and how can we overcome them?
Melina, do you want to take that?
I guess part of this is really how we're defining social enterprise. If we bring ownership into that definition, if we're talking about businesses that don't pursue capital as an end in itself, that aren't focused on short-term profit maximisation, where there's not a bonus culture that basically rewards the maximum extraction of capital for disinterested shareholders, then we can actually embrace some larger segments of the economy. I am talking about co-ops again, that are scalable. I do think that we need to be widening our definition of social enterprise to look at those businesses that currently support community ownership. You have mentioned Bank MECU, so the customer-owned banking sector, of course, 4.5 million Australians investing as stakeholders in credit unions. I think it's about focus, actually.
We've got another question here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan, first, thanks for your socks. Those are great socks. Danny, I think, like yourself, I've had a professional journey where I've been trying to bridge the profits, people, and planet. And in my daylight job, I was doing finance in the US, working in private equity, and then at night, working in the nonprofit sector on a volunteer basis and trying to bridge those together. I'm still searching for that elusive entry point where I can bridge those to value sets, where I can meet my daily needs, as well as fulfill and meet my value aspirations. And I'm sure there are a number of people in this audience that also are looking for that. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas or have thought about how people on a personal level can really pursue those values in a professional context.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's an element of build it and they will come. And that's definitely been our experience with Small Giants. I agree, and for me, the manifestation of that was Small Giants, and really the intention was to create a whole lot more. It's kind of like a beacon for yourself to come and join, whether it's in Small Giants or one of the businesses or one of the family of businesses surrounded, even if it's not, an investment of ours. And I guess that's the movement we're trying to create. I find that there aren't that many. There are plenty around, but plenty around that we don't know about, that have existed for a very long time. The idea of, a social enterprise or, profit with purpose or whatever you want to call it, is not new. And there are some like Oxfam that have been running a shop, commercial shop for a very long time that does amazing things. my sense of the reason why the movement or the term social enterprise is actually quite relevant and important today is it's just a calling card, it's just a label for now. You know, I'd like to think that we get rid of that label. You know, eventually it's like, you know, there's business and then there are, you know, the arseholes. And we don't think of business as a bad thing, we think of business as adding value to the world. And then there are just some who don't get it and we leave them behind. But until that, you know, I think that, you know, that element is still a minority. Personally, I'd get involved in whatever club or group or society or will chat or whatever it is. We just need to build it. You know, we need to build this network. And that can come through building your own company or working for another one that's just started or involved. Or I think there's also really significant value in shifting some of the big organisations. I think, as I said, I think they're ripe. A lot of the people are ready for this, but it's, I guess, that first question that we had earlier on, which is the bystander issue. And I think there's an element of human nature there. You know, there's human behaviour stuff that people leave it. Just don't be one of those people.
Okay, we've got the next question up the back there. Thank you.
Is it me?
No, I think it's me here. If I may. I have my hand up for a while and I feel that this
I'm sorry, it's hard to see you from
here.
No,
that's okay.
Please go ahead.
But the discussion has moved on somewhat, but I was a little bit frustrated because we're talking about laws as ways of, well, the corporate law and how people respond to that, but I missed the whole bit of what about incentivizing social enterprise? Not, you know, through tax breaks, through, you know, name it what it could be. It could be law reform or tax reform. I personally have been doing research into how to fund or set up a social business, and in doing that, I'm intrigued by this whole conversation about being in the system or out of the system. And so when you're in the system, you can go to a venture capitalist and you have a great technology idea and you can get money. If you're out of the system, you're a not-for-profit potentially, and you can get money. If you want to change the system, in the system, there's nowhere to go, or there are very few places to go. I just wonder what you think of that.
Melina, do you want to take that?
Well, you can go somewhere, and that is to your community. Communities can invest in businesses. They can raise the equity. They do it all the time to fund businesses that have social purpose. I do agree that there's not enough information out there. I mean, it's how many people here have done commerce or legal degrees? Were co-ops, cooperatives, mutuals, other forms of trading entity discussed during your degrees? Maybe a little bit. It's quite possible to go through a commerce, a legal degree and not address one of the major forms of incorporation that's actually taking place in our society. We do need intermediaries, professionals who are knowledgeable and encouraging to incentivise communities to know how to put the financial package together that you need to start something up. And certainly there's not enough public awareness of the range of models and opportunities that there are to engage in socially focused enterprise.
Before we come to you, there was another question further back. Thank you.
Yes, I understand there's a move to set up a social stock exchange, possible in Australia, possibly based in Sydney. Do you think that will help social trading progress and include B corporations?
Yeah, Mark?
Can I just, I mean, there seems to be, there's a common theme here about how much does what we call the social enterprise sector, how much does it want to be a sector on its own, or how much does it want to become part of the mainstream? Now, I'm not aware of the proposal you refer to, and it quite possibly is a good thing. If you lift it up to a high level, I think the more that what we call social enterprise or doing social good through the means of enterprise or the means of business, the more it becomes part of just the mainstream of business, the better, in my view. And going back to a couple of previous questions, probably a number of the previous questions, I think key to that is to the lady who sort of said, you know, what can I do? If you set up a business, then don't just leave it to the current goodwill that you have in your head. Institutionalise it. Write it in. If you form a company or a cooperative, you have to write a constitution which sets out your objects. That's your once-in-a-lifetime chance to say, these are the things that we won't compromise in the life of this institution, be it a company under the Corporations Act or be it a cooperative under the Victorian Cooperatives Act. I think that's where the key to it is to institutionalise these. The challenge we feel, or I suppose the lethargy that, going back to this gentleman's very early question that he referred to, comes from the fact that the momentum of the business world we live in substantially is so big and it's got so much 100-year momentum that it's really hard to say we can't just go and transfer all those businesses and change all their constitutions. It's just too big. So the way to start it is with startups, new ones, like Danny's, that just says these are the things that are completely inviolable in this business from this day on. That's the way to start the change, and also to start to create the legal institutions and structures that will embrace that.
We've got another question here.
Sure. Hi, I'm actually from Canada, and, over there?
No, please, I'm just indicating for the next question. Please, excuse me, I didn't mean to distract you.
It's all right. Anyways, I had Canada's 8B Corporation, so I'm quite glad to see a new one in Australia having started up. I have a question, having been in the social enterprise game for a little while and having gone through a shareholder proxy battle and lost it. How do you guard against mission drift once you have a successful enterprise, and let's say you're in a situation where the shareholders might say, well, now that this is a successful business, we want to take it into this sphere as opposed to what its original sphere was. So talk about governance and how you deal with potential mission drift.
Great question. I hate public companies. I hate the idea of anonymous shareholders. I think that that's one of the big cancers in our society, this idea that, I'm limited in my liabilities. I can own a share today and decide to sell it or buy it this morning and sell it this afternoon. And there's a wonderful book called Fixing the Game, which talks about the challenge between the expectations market, which is the share market, and then the real market, which is what we actually engage in. And it's almost like having the players on a football team betting on the game. And it's outrageous. I mean, we don't allow it, and I can't remember the guy's name, but who put a $20 bet and was fined and had to miss games and all that. But we have a system here where anyone can bet, and the same people are running the system. So there's an incentive there, obviously, to game the system. If we set a standard and then beat it, we say we won't do very well this year and then do a little bit better than we thought, share price can go up and I can play that game. So my argument would be stay out of the share market. Don't IPO. In fact, I had a company that came to us and said, invest in us, it's amazing. And they had a great team and they had a great vision for what they wanted to achieve in the world and great impact. But their exit was an IPO. And I just said, well, how can we, exactly your question, I said, how can we guard this impact in the future? So we decided not to invest.
We're getting, in fact, we're completely out of time, and I'm really sorry about that because there are so many questions, and I think it's such a stimulating conversation, and I think that's evident. What we're going to do is take one final question down here. You've got the microphone? And then we'll wrap it up.
Given that one of the main factors in social equity is being paid for employment, what does the panel think that can be done to redress the incredible imbalance we have now with a lot of youth who cannot get a job because older people can't retire because of the lack of growth in superannuation? You've got about 60% people with disabilities are unemployed, Indigenous people, people from other cultures, and people who are made redundant because of other factors. What can the social enterprise system have a role to play in redressing inequity in these areas?
Mark, you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question that you refer to, a very wide range of problems that we face as a society. But can I say this to you? let's not overburden the notion of social enterprise with all of society's woes. Let's be realistic about what it is and what it can do, and not make the mistake of saying that social enterprise is going to be some form of, or some panacea for all of the social problems we know exist with poverty. It is just one piece of the mosaic that is society, and we'd like to see it grow in its importance. A lot of the things this gentleman referred to in his questions, critical as they are, they're things that need responses through what I call social programs, social interventions. The pure private sector has a role in that, but I don't think we should make the mistake of trying to burden the social enterprise sector as being the answer to all of our challenges in society.
We are hideously out of time. Can I ask each of the panel to literally give a 60-minute final thought? A 60-second. Well, they probably could, couldn't they? And I'd be interested to hear it. But 60 seconds each, please, just to wrap it up. Jonathan.
60 seconds. I think movements matter. I think that you're right about social enterprise. It's really about movements of people setting the rules. Let's keep the debate. I want to urge people to continue, because we're running out of time, if you go to essentialvision.com.au/opinion, if you some of you didn't get your questions, we're happy to answer them, and I'm happy to pass them on if you still want to ask a question that we can get to. And really, I think it was a fabulous panel, wonderful questions from the audience.
Thanks, Jonathan. Danny.
So I'm Jewish, so I guess I always think of things in stories. But in 60 seconds, my sense of it is, and Mark said it, I think it's a chessboard, and there are a whole lot of different players. And on the board, some of you might have heard me say this before, but on the board you've got pawns, and queen and bishop and knights and all these different players. And I sort of think that we can't we can't focus and say, well, one player will save the world. I can't win a chess game with just a knight or just a queen. I really need to play with all of them. And there's no bad player as long as you're playing on my team, right? If you're on the other team, you're in trouble. But my sense of it is that we have to, the movement that we're talking about is not a movement within one area. It's a global movement saying we don't like this. It's almost at 99. And whether you're in a big corporate or you're a start-up or you're in a non-profit or you're in a cooperative, as I said, the outcome is impact. Winning the game for me means I've got kids. It means that they get a better world than I had. That's what winning the game is. And so I sort of think it's partnership, it's collaboration, it's, let's all strategically work together to win this.
Mark.
I think we have to take the 100-year view. I detected in the tone in a lot of questions here tonight was frustration. I'm in a corporation, I read in the newspaper about poor corporate behaviour, rogue traders and all that sort of stuff, because our institutions are occupied, that's what occupies our society. If we take the 100-year view, then we start to build an institutional structure which new businesses can move into very gradually, one at a time, like Danny's starfish. And then when someone's sitting around in this room in 100 years' time, it'll look a bit better.
Melina.
Well, I would agree with everything my panellists have just said. In summing up, especially looking at the DNA of the businesses, where is the value? Pay attention. Is it with the community? Is it with social value? That's the future of business, and we can drive towards that. But I just do want to quote the words of a poet, because they always say things the best. This is the wonderful Patti Smith. The people have the power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. Wrestle the world back. This is grassroots revolution through being disruptive capitalists in our everyday consuming decisions.
Thank you to the audience. You've been fantastic. And again, I'm sorry to those who we couldn't get to with the microphones. There's been a tremendous Twitter feed too. So if you go to Coops or Co-op 2012, you can follow a lot of the comments. There have been some great ideas there as well. As Jonathan said, there's another way to follow up there. So there's a lot that you can do to sort of leverage tonight. I think that the themes that have clearly come out are, certain words: ethics, community, collaboration, cooperation, innovation, and takes us back to the very well-chosen words, but profit, people, planet. David Brooks from Social Traders is going to wrap it up, but please do stay, have a glass of wine if you'd like, and have a chat with the panellists, and thank you very much for being a fabulous audience tonight.
Thanks, Michael, and I certainly think that we could go for another 60 minutes with this discussion, but ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight here at Fed Square for what has been a great event. Social Traders, I think, had initial discussions with Bank MECU and RMIT only about 3 months ago about this idea of having a forum. And so we're really pleased. I think all the partners are really pleased with how the event has come together in such a short period of time. And I think we probably could have had a lot more people if we had a bigger venue as well. So I just wanted to say that Social Traders is all about supporting social enterprise development and promoting social enterprise as a viable way of addressing challenging social and environmental issues in the communities and the society in which we live. And so it's a big thank you to our partners, Bank MECU and RMIT, in sharing our objectives in providing a platform like this for a conversation and debate that we've been able to bring to all of you in such a short period of time and bringing this event to fruition. On behalf of the three organisations, can I thank Michael Short as our compere and facilitator. Done a great job, Michael, with the panel and also with the audience. Some great discussion and some great questions over the last 90 minutes. And to our panel, to Jonathan and Danny and Mark and Melina, thanks very much for your perspectives and your contributions to the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel members. We do have some gifts. You might see over here. I'm not going to hand them out now, but we do have some gifts for the panel. A bottle of wine, courtesy of Goodwill Wines, who are a social enterprise. They sell wine, obviously, and they pass 50% of their profits onto community organisations and charities. So we also have a vintage book produced by Green Collect, another social enterprise that creates employment opportunities for disadvantaged people through their range of environmental and recycling services. I also have got some bedtime reading for the panel. This publication, From Where I Was to Where I Am, a publication that Social Traders produced with Jobs Australia, which tells the story of 7 people about their work in social enterprise, and also another publication that we've put out just recently in conjunction with Sustainability Victoria. It's a new publication which captures the story of, in case study format, of 5 organisations here in Victoria, one of which is Green Collect, and how they've used a social enterprise model to address a range of environmental issues. So, just in closing, Social Traders online directory, the Social Enterprise Finder, profiles all these organisations and over 5,000 other social enterprises around Australia. So if you are looking for a social enterprise or want to buy from a social enterprise, take a look at the Finder. Go to scfinder.com.au and you can find out a little bit more about the wide range of social enterprises that are providing goods and services in a number of industry sectors. Tomorrow morning we will be, you will receive an email from us which picks up or provides you with some of the key links to the organisations and some other information which hopefully will be of interest and useful to you. So in closing, thanks again to everyone for attending this evening. I invite you to stay around for a drink and a bite to eat. Our food tonight is provided by the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre, and the wine is from Goodwill Wines, two social enterprises. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can continue some of the conversation over a drink. Thank you.